Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, a military court begins and quickly adjourns the trial of 14 people accused of involvement in the assassination of late Burkina President Thomas Sankara. Known as Africa's Che Guevara, he was gunned down in a coup led by his former ally, exiled President Blaise Compaoré. Also, there are warnings that the mass displacement caused by years of a violent Islamist insurgency in northern Mozambique is leaving communities around Cabo Delgado with few services and little clean water. There are fears of a looming severe health crisis. And rebels in Ethiopia's embattled north say that the government has sent in hundreds of thousands of fighters for a coordinated assault on the region of Tigray. But first, after decades of a tense wait, Monday brought more disappointment for those hoping for answers about the killing of late Burkina President Thomas Sankara. The long-awaited military trial over his assassination was postponed for 2 weeks, not long after opening. Amongst the 14 charged is former President Blaise Compaoré, who's being tried in absentia. He's been in exile in Ivory Coast since being toppled in 2014. Sankara's death has been shrouded in secrecy for 34 years. The leader changed Burkina Faso's name from French colonial Upper Volta and defied Western powers with a socialist agenda. The Marxist revolutionary was gunned down in 1987 in a coup led by Compaoré. Sankara's widow told France 24 that she is disappointed that her late husband's former ally will not be in court.
C'est dommage, il devrait venir.
It's a shame. He should have come. He was one of the leaders at the time. He needs to answer questions from judges in Burkina Faso. I hope he will come one day.
C'est à lui que le crime a profité. C'est lui qui en a profité.
He is the one who benefited from the crime. We have heard many things since his assassination.
On entend tout ce qu'on peut entendre.
All of it leads us to think it was a premeditated murder.
C'est un crime, un assassinat prémédité.
And the one who benefited from the situation, you can't say he's innocent.
On peut pas dire qu'il soit innocent.
Well, police in Mozambique say that they've killed the head of an armed breakaway faction of the main opposition group, Renamo. Authorities accuse the Renamo military junta of a string of fatal attacks in the centre of the country. Mariana Nongo was reportedly killed early Monday in Sofala province. Attacks by the insurgents have undermined a peace treaty between Renamo and ruling party Frelimo that followed a 2019 ceasefire between the parties. Mozambique's also struggling to respond to an Islamist insurgency in the northern province of Cabo Delgado, in which thousands have been killed since 2017. The instabilities made it very difficult to get a sense of the extent of the impact of the conflict. The International Committee of the Red Cross has recently wrapped up a mission to the region and warns that, aside from the violence, communities are facing massive displacement and a public health crisis. The ICRC's Director of Operations has just returned from Cabo Delgado and earlier told me more about his findings.
First of all, I'm indeed just back from a few days in Cabo Delgado in the north of Mozambique, where I had a first-hand experience of the serious humanitarian consequences the conflict has had on the civilian population. More than 800,000 people have been displaced since the beginning of last year. This is 1/3 of the entire province. All of this comes in combination with a population that is already seriously exposed to climate shocks, as we have seen in 2019. And what I saw in Montepuez, which is about 200 kilometers inland from Pemba, from the coast, is really a population that is deeply traumatized by the violence they have experienced, and they are now really depending on humanitarian aid.
So you mentioned there that your warnings are that the conflicts really exacerbated the effects of climate change. Are you in a position to assess whether one has had more of a negative impact on communities than the other?
Well, it's probably difficult to say, and it's always what communities themselves are experiencing. What we can say is that the combination of conflict, violence, and these repeated climate shocks that we saw in particular in 2019 with two deadly cyclones, Idai and Kenneth, have further exacerbated the vulnerability of the populations. I spoke to families in Montepuez who had to leave the very north of Cabo Delgado and arrived in Montepuez with absolutely nothing. And these very same people had already been affected by the cyclone Kenneth and had absolutely no time to even think about recovery.
So that huge flux of people that we've seen forced out by the conflict has put pressure on the infrastructure of host communities. Are host communities doing any better than the displaced people when it comes to being able to deal with finding water, finding food, getting through, getting hold of the basics for survival?
Well, this is indeed a very serious issue. Imagine towns like the one that I just visited that has about 80,000 inhabitants and all of a sudden is faced with a massive influx of internally displaced people, tens and tens of thousands, putting additional pressure on already very, very fragile public service provision, in particular in terms of healthcare and water. In these towns, there is hardly any water networks. People they rely on unprotected sources, and now, of course, with this massive influx, the pressure is even much bigger, and that is precisely why we, the International Committee of the Red Cross, we are supporting precisely these type of services in the field of primary health care and the provision of safe drinking water.
So where do you go from here? What do you hope the response to your findings will be? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, yes, I think it is really important now in the immediate short term to ensure that we, organizations such as ours, can continue to provide life-saving services, supporting these very essential services that are provided in mainly these urban areas. And in a second step, it will be important to support the return of these populations to their places of origin, where they can rebuild their livelihoods. And I think in the medium long term, it is all about inclusive socio-economic policies that offer economic opportunities for the people in the north of Mozambique that is extremely resource rich. And everything needs to be done that local communities can participate in the economic development in the north of Mozambique.
In other news, rebels in Ethiopia's north say that the government has launched an offensive in the region of Tigray. Local forces claim that hundreds of thousands of fighters have been sent in to launch a coordinated assault. Tigray has been at the centre of almost a year of devastating conflict. Maria Gerth-Nicolescu has more.
This push by the Ethiopian government was actually expected. Tigrayan rebels had been controlling parts of the Amhara region, especially areas near the border with Tigray for the last few months. And it's therefore likely that the Ethiopian army, along with regional forces from Amhara and also militias from the Amhara region, are going to use their renewed military strength to try and push back the Tigrayan forces. Over the past months, the Ethiopian army has integrated a lot of new recruits, has purchased armament. It is now reportedly carrying out airstrikes against the Tigrayan forces in those parts of Amhara. The Tigrayan forces do not have this type of military capacity. However, they do have some advantage when it comes to navigating the very mountainous areas of northern Ethiopia. The leader of the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, said that the army is now carrying out drone attacks using heavy artillery and tanks in order to attack the Tigrayan rebels on the ground.
After 2 months without a government, Tunisia's new prime minister has named a cabinet. The appointment includes a record number of women and comes after the last government was abruptly fired by President Kais Saied in a controversial power grab. Catherine Viette with more.
After 11 weeks without a government, Tunisia has one again. It's being led by Najla Bouden, the first woman to hold the post of prime minister in Tunisia or any Arab country. The new cabinet, composed mostly of allies of President Kais Saied, also includes a record number of women, like Leila Jaffel, a career magistrate heading up the Ministry of Justice, and Siam Bougdiri, a tax expert, as finance minister. Taoufik Sharfadine is the new interior minister, a post he held previously until being fired in 2020. During the swearing-in ceremony, Bouden said the main priority will be to tackle corruption.
One of the most important goals ever is to combat corruption, which is increasingly spreading day by day and leads to a loss of confidence in any radical and real reform attempt.
But it's unclear just how much power the cabinet will actually be able to wield. Since July 25th, President Saied has granted himself near total control of the government. He's suspended parliament, announced plans to appoint a committee to amend the constitution, and now legislates by decree. Saied's critics say his actions amount to a coup. Some 6,000 people took to the streets of the capital on Sunday to rally against Saied's perceived power grab.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.